Okay, with all this social distancing and work from homing, it seemed like an appropriate time to make some sourdough. If I'm making sourdough, I might as well show you how I make it. The intention here is I'm going to try to show you all of the steps that I do in as near to real time as possible. Not everything is going to be perfect. This is just a random filming setup, so some of the shots are going to be terrible. I've got a GoPro going up here as well, so just in case maybe we can get a better angle on some things. I'm going to dive right in. So you're going to need 800 grams of flour. That's, or rather, you need 1,000. You need 500 grams of whole wheat flour and 500 grams of bread flour. The reason the bread flour is important is it's got a higher protein content. It makes your bread stronger and it gives you a better bubbles on the inside. It holds together better. You need 800 milliliters of it's around 80 to 90 degree water. It's kind of a pain to get it to the right temp, so just use an instant read thermometer. Throw it in the microwave for 10-20 seconds at a time. Keep checking it until you're between 80 and 90 and closer to 80 than 90. And then, and I prepped this last night, so I'll make another video later to show you how to do this. You want to add 200 grams of your starter. You have to prep it the night before so that it has enough time to let the bacteria get active and eat the flour that you've mixed it with. But 200 grams of this. We mix it all together by hand, which I'm just about to do. And then you wait half an hour to maybe an hour. And then you add 20 grams of salt. Hold off on waiting the salt for at least 30 minutes. Adding salt retards the growth and activity of the bacteria in your starter. So then that would reduce the amount of rise and flavor you get in your loaf later. So let the bacteria do its thing for at least 30 to 60 minutes before you add your salt. All right. So we've got our flour. Gonna add a starter. You can kind of see how stringy it is. That's actually great. That shows how many bubbles were going on, how active your yeast was overnight. Go, that's your starter. Now we're going to add the 800 milliliters of our 80-ish degree water. Again, if it's 85, that's fine. If it's 83, I don't give a shit. Just somewhere between 80 and 90, lean closer to 80 than 90. And we're talking Fahrenheit here. There's some water. And then now's the fun part. It gets super messy. So I'm going to take my ring off. You mix it all by hand. I can't even show you. It's going to spill everywhere. Hold on. This is what it looks like right now. It's really soupy. Then you just mix it all by hand. Your fingers are going to get super sticky and wet. But you just reach down on the sides. And you slowly mix it up. You're just trying to get this all homogeneous. You get swamp monster fingers. Make sure you get all the dry stuff at the bottom because it's going to be hiding down there. So just scoop down underneath, kind of down and around. You can even squeeze it a little bit to try to get your ingredients mixed in. Feel free to squeegee off the dough from your fingers to get a little more space to work with. And just want to get all the dry ingredients. So right now, I've just got a little bit of flour sitting at the bottom here still. And I'm trying to mix it. See, this is why we do the videos in real time, so you see how long this actually takes. If I just tell you mix it, and then you try to do it at home, you're going to think you're doing it wrong because it takes too long. When you're not, it just takes a while sometimes. Okay, that is about there. Let me get my fingers a little cleaner. I will show you what this looks like. It's messy business. All right, so it looks kind of like this. It's all mixed together, pretty homogeneous. So what we're going to do now is I like to cover my bowl of saran wrap and then with a towel, because what's happening right now is we're creating an environment for the bacteria from our starter to do its thing the best it can. And its thing here is eating the flour, and it's actually fermenting it. That's where a lot of our flavor comes from. That's where all the bubbles come from. It's the gas from their eating process. So we want to trap heat. That's why we wrap it in a towel. And we want to keep airflow from hitting the top, because that dries out the top, creates a weird crust, and it doesn't let things rise. So we wrap it in saran wrap, and we wrap it in a towel, and we tuck it into a corner for about 30 minutes. So I'm going to clean my fingers and then do that right now. Let's see if I can get this turned off. Okay, hands are all clean. Saran wrap. Like I said, I'm trying to show you every step I can so that you actually understand what's going on, including covering bowls. So just wrap the top. It doesn't need to be a perfect seal. We're just trying to keep any draft from hitting the mixture that we got here. Take a kitchen towel. I like these surgical kitchen towels. They work great. They're very absorbent. They clean easily. Just wrap it around there. We're just trying to kind of trap any heat that's going on in here. There's actually the bacteria that's in here is creating a little bit of heat, but we're also trying to capture the heat that came from our 80 to 90-ish degree water. And so we're going to just set a timer for 30 minutes. I usually use a Google Home or Alexa or something. Anything works. 30-minute timer. Then we add our 20 grams of salt, and you'll see them. Okay, so the timer just went off. We were waiting about 30 minutes. Again, you can go anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour on this. It's pretty flexible, so take your time, whatever works best for you. But we uncover, so I just pull the towel off of this guy. We uncover our dough as it is right now. Keep the saran wrap. We're going to need it again in a second. Here's what it's looking like right now. Show it to the GoPro in case that footage gets better. And then we take our 20 grams of salt. Remember, we waited to add the salt because we did not want to retard the action or slow down the action of the bacteria. Bacteria is often also referred to as yeast, but this did not come from a yeast packet. So that's why I refer to it as bacteria. I don't want to confuse you. So the bacteria from the starter would be slowed down. Now, this is 20 grams of a dry flake salt. Ideally, you're using something like a dry flake salt or a kosher salt. If you're using a table salt, or I'll duck a little bit so you can see better, a table salt or an iodized salt, ideally you're not using those, but if that's all you have around, that's totally fine. Cut it down to 10 grams. That stuff's about twice as salty as a good flake salt or a kosher salt, so cut the volume in half. So if you're using your table salt or your iodized salt, 10 grams. If you're using a good dry flake salt or a kosher salt, 20 grams. So we just sprinkle it around. Again, you want to measure this out. I'm giving all the measurements in weight because weight is consistent. Measuring scoops are not. So to keep this consistent and delicious every time, we use weights. All right, now once again, we use our fingers. We just mix it all in. Well, maybe I can get a better angle here. That's a little better. Just kind of grab around the edges. We're just trying to get the salt mixed in homogeneously with all the dough. You're already going to feel a difference in it. It's going to be a little bit firmer than before. Because, like, see, my hands aren't coming back like a swamp monster anymore. Everything's kind of holding together. The gluten is already starting to develop. Now, for those of you who avoid gluten like the plague, I'll admit that's actually usually me as well. I don't really eat much gluten except when it is in sourdough form, because the fermentation process actually helps break down a lot of the things that are bothering your gut. Now, it's also possible that you're being reacted, or you are reacting to things that tend to hang out with gluten rather than actually problems with gluten. A lot of store-bought bread has ingredients added to it to make it last longer on the shelf. And those things are actually going to be what bothers your gut more than the gluten. So anyway, sourdough, fermented sourdough, tends to sit with your gut a little bit better. So if you are really missing bread and you try to avoid gluten, try sourdough. Just try a little bit, see how it does. Okay, so we mix it up. See how that looks? All the salt is evenly mixed up. Then we cover this for another half hour. And then we do the next steps. Again, saran wrap on top. We're trying to avoid any draft. And we wrap it in a towel. Now, while we're wrapping this up, a couple other points on protecting this guy and keeping it warm. I'm using a plastic bowl, which isn't very conductive of heat, which is great. If you are using a metal bowl, which I do occasionally, and especially if you have a stone or metal countertop, this one's wood, you should get a trivet to put underneath the bowl so that the bowl doesn't leach heat underneath. So a silicone trivet works great. You can fold up another towel and throw it underneath. You can use some fabric trivets that your grandma gave you, anything really. The cork trivets that they sell at IKEA, which I'm looking at right now. Really anything just to insulate the cool surface, so stone, metal, anything like that, from the metal surface of your bowl. If you're using a plastic bowl, and this one's even got a foot, which you can see right here, it's not much of a problem. But if you are using a metal bowl, then it actually is pretty important. You want to keep the bottom of your bowl insulated. All right, I'm going to set another 30-minute timer, and then I'll be back for the next steps. Okay, so our dough has been sitting for another 30 minutes or so, and we're going to remove the towel and the saran wrap. The next step here is, instead of kneading the dough, we're actually just folding it. We're going to do that inside of the bowl. One thing you can do to keep your fingers from getting sticky is just run them under a little cold water. Slightly damp, cold, wet hands don't stick to the dough as easily. So you can see the dough, it's actually expanded quite a bit. It's hit the sides. So what we're going to do is we're just going to reach down underneath and pull up and over. We're going to keep doing that. You end up doing this about somewhere between 6 and 10 times. You do this pull up and over motion, and this slowly helps get everything homogeneous in the bowl. You really just keep doing it until the dough doesn't let you do it anymore. So you can see the dough's kind of stretchy, but once it stops being so stretchy and it starts looking like it might tear on you, that's when you stop. We actually do this process multiple times. Let's see. What if the GoPro can see this? Fold. Again, we're doing this in real time, so you can see what it's like. It's not actually hard. It's just a little time consuming, but once you get it down, the process is easy. If you're working from home, which it seems like a lot of us are, it's pretty easy to just do in between other things. And the timings for a lot of these things, the 30 minutes, the 45 minutes, the hour, is pretty flexible. So if you're in the middle of a meeting and you need to take another 20 minutes, it's fine. All right, I think we're about there. Yeah, I'm not getting much more stretch out of this. Okay, cool. So we cover that up again with our saran wrap. And our towel. And then we're going to set another 30-minute timer on this, but we actually do the same process 2 to 3 more times. So 4 times total is actually what I aim for. And I find it's really easy for me to forget how many times I've done this. So what I do is I always grab 4 of something, 4 chopsticks, 4 bamboo skewers, 4 toothpicks, 4 of something. And I use those as counters because I just forget. Like, did I do this twice? Did I do this 3 times? So I take 4 and I set them to one side of my surface. And every time I do one, I pick one item up and I place it on the other side of my work surface. So at the end, when I have no more chopsticks, bamboo skewers, or toothpicks on my right side and they're all on my left, I know I've done my last folding. All right, I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes and we're going to do the same exact thing again. Okay, it's been another 30 minutes. So we're going to repeat the same exact process we did before. This is time number 2. I know this because I still have 3 chopsticks on my right side. So towel off, saran wrap off, get your fingers wet with some cold water. And you can see it's looking like right now. We're just gonna kind of reach down in here. What you see me do is I'm kind of scooping in and trying to get under. And pick it up and fold it across. And do the same, pick it up, fold it across. We just do this until it doesn't really stretch all that well anymore. Okay. There you go. So fold it a bunch of times. It wasn't really stretching much anymore. It was kind of coming together at the beginning. You could tell when you were lifting it up on one side, it was really stretching a lot. And then as you're doing it, you're feeling it tighten up more and more and more until it's not really giving you much stretch anymore. It feels like it's more likely to tear. That's when you go to stop. It's usually around, I don't know, 10-ish. We can go back and count how many I did in this video later. But it's better just to do it by feel. And again, we cover this up and we're going to set ourselves a 30-minute timer. We move one of our counters to the other side so we keep track. All right, I will see you again shortly. Okay, now we're going to do the third fold. Towel off, saran wrap off, wet fingers. You don't want your fingers to be soaking wet, just take them off in the sink a bit. You just want them like dampish. Again, reach into the bowl, and we pull it up. You can see how much stretch there's right now. And down. And I did count on the last video, it was 10 exactly. So 10-ish folds will get you where you want to go. Up and across. Up. Just keep it perfect and across. Up, across, up, starting to get a little tougher, up and across, it may seem like a lot of steps, but it's totally worth it. Across. And if you repeat all the steps that you're doing out loud to yourself, the whole time, it doesn't seem as monotonous. Up and across. Okay, so that's probably about right. Maybe do one more just because I feel like it. A big one up and across. And then sometimes what I like to do when I'm done with the folding is just make sure that the seam that I just made is kind of pinched together. So I pull it up and across, and I like to kind of pull it together a little bit, just so it's got a little bit of a form. Or more of a form, I suppose. But that's that. You can guess the next steps here. Saran wrap on top just to protect it from the breeze. No draft on there. So I know I mentioned it before, but again, what happens is if you don't cover the top, the light air movement in the kitchen is going to cause the top of your bread to dry out a little bit. Because it's dry, it's going to harden. Because it's hard, when the bacteria is trying to expel the gas it creates, that typically creates a rise, but the stiff surface traps that gas and it keeps it from expanding because that stiff surface is going to be stronger than the slight gas expansion. So it actually keeps the bacteria from being able to eat as effectively because it's kind of stewing in its own gassy juices, and then you don't get as good of a rise on your dough. So we just make sure that we don't let a draft get to our dough. And we cover it up again, wrap it in our towel, move our counter. So we're going to have one more fold after this. I'm going to set a 30-minute timer, and I'll be right back. Okay, so another 30 minutes has gone by. We're going to do our final folding. Again, wet fingers. All right. Towel off, saran wrap off. You're going to notice every time you uncover this again, the dough on the inside is actually going to be a little bit bigger than the time before. That's a good sign. It means there's some activity going on. Some things are rising. Take the ring off. Up. Stretch. Do it a little quicker this time, since you've already seen this 3 times. Alright, this is starting to get pretty stiff, so I think we're good. And what I'm doing right here is kind of see the top looks a little ugly. I'm just pinching it together a little bit, create a little bit of what we call a seam. So you can kind of see that line now. So now's the easy part. Cover it up again, same as before, saran wrap in a towel, trap that heat, but we wait for 2 to 3 hours. And this is what's called our first rise, or one of the bulking rises. So we wait 2 to 3 hours, and then we move on to our next steps, where we will take the dough out of here, out of the bowl. We're going to throw it onto a floured surface, cut it into a few balls, kind of shape those up a little bit, let them do a bench rest, and then we're going to do our next rise. I'll show you exactly what that looks like in about 3 hours. See you then. Okay, it's been about 3 hours, so we're going to get to the next steps on the bread. Now things start to get fun. We start to see things coming into shape, we could say, if you like bad puns. Because we're about to shape our doughs, or at least a little bit. But you can see how much this grew over 3 hours. See? Ignore this. So what we do is we need to dump this out onto a floured surface. Now you can use your countertop if you like, but I have a small kitchen, so I need to keep this countertop as usable as possible, so I'm just going to pull up a big cutting board. All right, great big cutting board. We're going to sprinkle it with some flour so things don't stick. Don't have to go crazy, just enough flour to kind of cover it a little. Awesome. So we're going to dump it out, and then we're going to cut it in half using a bench scraper. These are also known as pastry knives. They can have an offset handle at the top. They can have a handle that's right in the center. They usually have measurements on here in case you need to measure certain lengths of cuts or something, but we use it for chopping things and moving ingredients around on your cutting surface. Again, if your fingers are a little wet, it helps here. It's probably useful to just have a small bowl on the side of cold water. You dip your fingers in. Oh, and just an FYI, 3 hours is absolutely plenty of time to also bake up a pan of brownies. So if you're interested in the brownie recipe or you want me to walk you through that, just leave a comment somewhere and I'll do that video too. But back to the bread. So our bread rings off. Our bread has doubled, more than doubled in volume. You can see that coming out here. Look at that. You can see kind of just how enormous this thing is. It's significantly larger than my head, if that helps at all. So take this bad boy, take your bench scraper, you kind of find the middle-ish. You can do it the long way, you can do it the wide way, whatever is easy for you. Bench scraper down, slice, pull up a little bit to keep them separate, because these will, if they're big enough, come back together again. All right, separate those bad boys. All we're doing here is kind of pulling these ends up on top and across each other and trying to keep them from coming back together. So we're just making really rough circular-ish shapes here. And then we're gonna let this do what's called a bench rest, which basically just means let it sit here for 20 minutes. So we pull these long ends, kind of pull them into the center a little bit. If that's not enough, pulling these sides a little. Make sure you get flour all over your cutting board, because otherwise things are gonna get sticky. So, and give these 2 loaves some space because they will continue to spread out a bit. And you don't have to worry about them looking pretty right now because they probably won't. But set them up like that. Kind of see what's going on. Let me give you a better angle here. You don't want to just depend on the GoPro. So they look kind of like that. And now we're actually going to move on to the next step. We're not even going to have a cut in the video. I need to move this cutting board somewhere else. We're going to prep what's referred to as our proofing baskets. Now you can get special baskets made just for this. Just clean off my fingers here. Special baskets made just for this, but you don't really need to. Just use some stainless steel bowls and you'll be fine. Now, as you notice, we were making 2 loaves out of that. If you want more loaves, you can just cut it smaller and do all the same steps that we're doing moving forward here. But I find the 2 loaves out of this is a pretty good size. So 2 stainless steel bowls, they're about the same size. Maybe you can get an idea for the size here. I couldn't tell you how much they hold. This one's a 4-quart, and this one is slightly bigger. So I would say 4-quart is on the smaller side. We're going to prep our proofing baskets. For that, we need a couple of towels. I'm going to use 2 of my kitchen towels. And we need a non-starchy flour. Often this is a rice flour. I actually prefer to use tapioca flour, also called tapioca starch. They're the same exact thing. Tapioca flour, tapioca starch are the same thing. Rice flour is different. So we take some of this. This is the tapioca flour / starch. And we take our towels. Let's do one at a time so you can see what's going on. Kind of loosely drape your towel on top, press it in, try to get it down as much as you can. And then you take tapioca flour. And this stuff's super light and powdery, so you don't need much. But it does make a mess if you screw stuff up. So you just sprinkle some in there, and then you kind of rub your hand around. And there's a lot of clouds in the air. But what we're trying to do is just get a light coating of this onto the towel, because this will be where we put our dough next. And if the towel can absorb too much moisture, the dough is going to stick to it. And then when we try to remove it later, we get a huge mess. So it looks kind of like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just doing a nice-ish job. Do the same with the next bowl. Towel in. This is a 4-quart one. Do a little tapioca starch. Oh, hey Google, set a timer for 18 minutes.
18 minutes, starting now.
So we wanted to let our bread rest for 20 minutes, and I forgot about it for probably 2-ish minutes. Maybe slightly more, whatever. Again, these measurements are all fairly flexible and forgiving. Again, gets dusty, but again, that's what it looks like on the inside. I'm going to give it 17 or so minutes, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how we do the next steps with our loaves. Okay, so we've given our two, they're referred to as pre-shapes, 20 minutes of bench rest. Not a whole lot's happened other than that, just giving it time. You saw me prep the baskets already, which I've got on either side so that we can move on to our next step here. So we're going to once again need a little bit of all-purpose flour. Let me shift this so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Sprinkle a little bit on top of the loaf here because we're about to flip this over and we really don't want it sticking to our surface. This part's a little bit tricky because these are very big and I need to actually flip this up onto the bench scraper, the flour underneath it, and flop it back down where this top side is now down. So let's see what the best way to do this is. I remember. We're going to kind of go like so. The flour on your surface. And we're going to flip it over. And you don't want to be too rough when you do that because otherwise you're going to knock all the air out that we just spent a few hours gaining. So now we're going to do a shaping. We're going to do what's called an envelope fold. So we're going to take the top. So for you, it's what's closest to the camera here. For me, it's what's further away from me. We're going to pull it away. It's probably hard to tell what's going on. So let me see if I'll try this one-handed. So you want to pull it away, and you're going to see that's kind of stretching a little bit, if you can see that. And you pull that back down, not all the way, about 2/3 of the way down. So it looks kind of like that. Then you do the same thing from the other end. We pull it, and we want to stretch it a little bit here. So can you see that that's stretching? Yeah. We go up and we go over the other fold that we just did. So we get this weird little shape. And we turn it 90 degrees and we do the same exact thing. We take the top, we pull it out, and we're gentle here. We're not trying to tear anything. We're just stretching it a little. And we pull it down about 2/3. And we do that with the bottom. Pull it up over the top. Next, we want to kind of pinch where it comes together, and we actually roll it on its side like this. And the easiest way to get that seam together, which is right here, and the seam's important, to actually use this part of the hand, and you just kind of hit it a little bit to bring it together. Now, you can see a few of these parts aren't floured super well. That's okay. So now we've got our seam up, and the next step is we're going to take, I like to use a pie tin. We're going to put more of that tapioca starch in here. And we have to roll the whole thing in tapioca starch. When we're done, it's going to look like a really powdery burrito, like a super fluffy, the best burrito you've ever had burrito. That's what you're aiming for. I'm just doing a couple of small handfuls in the pie tin. Again, your hands are going to get a lot of stuff on it. Looks kind of like that. Let's get you a good angle of the action. So, pie tin's right here. I'm going to lay this down on the flour. Keep track, or the tapioca flour. Keep track of where the seam is. As we lay it down, we kind of roll it a little bit roll it, roll it, roll it. And if there's the sides probably will be a little light on the tapioca flour, so just rub those down a little bit. Then transfer it to our bowl, and we want the seam to be up when we put it into this bowl. It's important because later we actually flip it out upside down, and we want the seam down when we're baking it. So pick it up. Again, it's like the world's most decadent burrito. You flip it into your bowl, seam side up, and then you use the towel that it's set in and lightly flip it over the top. Flip it over the top. And this is actually going to go through its second rise. So that was one. Now we're going to do it the second one. The second one's easier because you can pre-flour your first surface here. If you need to clean off your surface, go ahead. Another great use for bench scrapers is they scrape things. Okay. Flour on the surface, a little flour on top. And put this up. And then now we've got the side that was down is up. We're going to do that letter fold again. So we're going to pull it away from us and then come back about 2/3. Pull it away from us. And it's okay if it's not really stretching it. Just give it a little hand, hold the back, go to base, flip it up. And when you're flipping it up, if you tuck it in a tiny bit, it helps keep the edges of your loaf from getting what's sometimes referred to as a belly button, which is just a weird shape that happens at the end of your loaf. So again, we flip it 90 degrees. We do the same thing we just did. We're gonna stretch the top out a bit. When you're doing this, you can probably even see it here. These are giant air bubbles. These are incredible. You're trying to not destroy those as much as possible. It happens, but do your best to keep as many of the air bubbles as you can. Okay, stretch it out, flip it up to the top. Excellent. Then we roll it down, and we want to seal that seam again, so we use this part. We're going to lose some air bubbles here, and that's totally fine. Now we've got our seam up. Maybe a little more tapioca flour in this guy. It's looking a little light, and you can always put extra tapioca flour back in the bag. So anything that doesn't stick is basically untouched. Okay, let's give you a nice view of this. So take it, seam side up, lay it down in the flour, roll it around. Now, if you were doing this with a starchy flour, like just a regular all-purpose flour or a whole wheat flour, this flour on the outside would get saturated. It would steal moisture from the loaf on the inside. It would get sticky and it would get stuck to your towel. So again, that's not something we want. So take one of your, we're going to call these proofing baskets, where we prep things. Pick this up. If there's a ton of stuff on there, you can brush it off a little and lay that down gently in your proofing basket. Take your towel, fold it over the top. This is us kind of protecting the draft again, because these are going to sit for another 3 to 4 hours now on their second rise. Now, I recommend you set a timer for 3.5 hours. So I'm going to do that right now. Hey, Google, set a 3.5 hour timer.
3 hours and 30 minutes. And that's starting now.
Excellent. So the reason I do that is it takes about 30 minutes to get your oven up to temp. And I like being right at 4 hours when these go into the oven. If I preheat the oven half an hour beforehand, then I know that's taken care of and I don't forget about a fairly important step. What's also really important at that point is the vessel that you cook the bread in. I typically use a Dutch oven, like this one. This one is from Lodge. I couldn't tell you how big it is. It's a something quart Dutch oven. Probably doesn't have much, but I think it's about $50 on Amazon. It's not that bad, and you use it all the time in cooking. If you don't have a Dutch oven, you can use a pizza stone. So throw that in the oven when you're preheating. Or you can use a cast iron skillet, or even better, an enameled cast iron skillet. And with the pizza stone enameled cast iron skillet and cast iron skillet, you also need some sort of top. Typically, you would use a stainless steel bowl. So let me demonstrate. First, the reason the cast iron, the pizza stone, the Dutch oven, the reason those are important is a concept called hearth. When we're baking bread, we're not just baking it with air circulating around it. We actually want some sort of stone to be imparting heat into the bread. And so the Dutch oven, because it's cast iron skillet, the enameled cast iron, even the pizza stone, those all hold on to heat really well. So when we open up the oven, the temp doesn't drop on this surface. We put the bread on it, and an immense amount of heat comes from that surface and is shared with the bread. But because they're so thick and heavy, they don't lose that heat and then create like a steam bath situation where you get like a sticky dumpling kind of bread. You want something that can hold on to a lot of heat and continuously impart it into your bread. With the Dutch oven, it comes with a lid, which is great because the first half of baking, we want the lid on because we are generating a little bit of steam. It keeps the outside of the bread soft so we can get a good rise. The second half, we take the lid off so that we get a beautiful crust. It's no longer going to be rising at that point, but at that point is when we're developing a lot of flavor. We're getting the Maillard reaction, we're getting caramelization on the crust, and that's how you get those beautiful colors that you often see when you look at photos on Instagram. It's really easy to do with the Dutch oven. You just lift the lid, it's not a problem. With a pizza stone, you've got a flat surface, it doesn't really have a lid. So you can take a stainless steel bowl, because these things handle heat in the oven just fine, and when you place your bread onto the pizza stone, put a stainless steel bowl right on top of it. Those things heat up so fast you don't have to worry about preheating it so much. You still can, it's just really dangerous because there's no handle, so be extremely careful. Similarly with a cast iron skillet or an enameled cast iron skillet, you can use the stainless steel bowl, make sure it kind of fits inside a little bit so it works like a lid. But again, it's difficult to get on and off, so just be really careful because these things are hot. You can burn yourself. I've definitely burnt myself, even though I was trying to be careful. Just the lightest grays will get you a pretty terrible burn because the oven's running at just shy of 500 degrees when we're baking this bread. So use a Dutch oven if you've got one. They're great. You can only do one loaf at a time in here, but honestly, this is one of the most valuable things you could probably own in a kitchen in terms of pans. If you don't have that, cast iron skillet, enameled cast iron skillet's even better because things are less likely to stick, and pizza stone. All three of those, use a stainless steel bowl as your lid. Okay, so in 3.5 hours, I'm going to turn on the oven to 475 degrees, and the item I'm baking in my case, a Dutch oven, is going to be placed in the oven at that same time so that it can also heat up. So it's got all that heat to throw right into the bread as soon as the bread's placed in there about 30 minutes later. Okay, I will see you in 4 hours because I'm going to preheat the oven 30 minutes before the bread's done. See you soon. Okay, so it's been about 3.5 hours. We have half an hour before we throw the bread into the oven. Now's when we want to preheat things. There's a couple things to check for. Open up your oven and make sure you'll have plenty of space to fit your Dutch oven or your pizza stone with a bowl on top, because the last thing you want is to find out that you have your oven preheated and everything's really hot, but you can't fit things where you need to, because moving those racks when they're 475 degrees is not fun. So you probably, depending on the size of your oven, there's a really good chance you'll need to move one rack to the very top and one rack to the very bottom. If you've got 3 racks, just take one of them out temporarily, set it on a counter or something. But right now is when we want to place our items in the oven and preheat everything to 475 Fahrenheit. So I'm going to throw that in, and then we just set a timer for another 30 minutes. The oven should be preheated by then. If not, just check your thermometers to make sure it's good. Also, I highly recommend getting an oven thermometer. I'm new to this oven, so I'm actually testing it against 3 different thermometers right now. These ones. The Rubbermaid commercial standard or something like that, the similar name. is on Amazon. It's maybe $7 or $8. It seems to be very accurate, so I highly recommend that one. But you should always have an oven thermometer inside your oven because ovens are notorious for not being able to actually regulate heat correctly. So you want to know what's going on. Get an oven thermometer. All right, so we're going to throw my red Dutch oven into the oven and then preheat everything for 475, and I'll see you in about 30 minutes. Okay, we are nearly complete. The bread has been sitting for 4 hours now. You can see when you take a look, it's risen quite a bit. It's not going to stick to the towel because we drenched it in the tapioca starch. So what we need to do now, ovens preheated, Dutch ovens in there, is we need to remove this from here without knocking all of the air out of it that we just spent all that time building up. So the way we do that is we use some parchment paper. Forgot to turn on the GoPro. We use some parchment paper. We spread that over the top, and we do kind of a swirling motion to turn it over so that when the bread lands on the parchment paper, it lands very gently. If we flip it over like this, you get a hard smack and you lose a lot of the air. If you try to flip it out and dump it into something really fast, you get the same problem. But if you do a smooth twisting flip motion, it tends to work out pretty well. So you hold the parchment paper down on the edges pretty tight. You don't want to drop it. And we twist and drop. And when you do that, you'll feel that it lightly, gently shifts to the parchment paper. Lift off your bowl, lift off your towel, and we've got a really beautiful piece of bread here. Now, before we put it in the Dutch oven, we have to put a slice in this so that for the first 15 minutes of the bake, when it's covered and it's steaming a little bit, it opens up and it can expand to its full size. Now you can use a razor blade for this. I often just use a paring knife. Ideally, you do this when it's already in the Dutch oven, because otherwise it can kind of close up again when you're transporting it. But I'm trying to show you how this is done, and it's a lot easier to do it here than it is in front of a really hot oven. So you don't want to go super deep, but you just do a light cut all the way across. And this is where people get really fancy and they try to like make it look like wheat. And they do extra little cuts on here. And those don't really do anything for the rise on your loaf. And some people really like them in terms of presentation. So you can do that. You can get also really creative when you do that. A buddy of mine did the Avengers logo in a loaf of his bread. It looked phenomenal. Richie, you nailed it. So I'm going to pause the video so that we can get a better shot of me transferring this to the oven. Okay, so we're about to transfer the dough that I was just showing you into the oven. And this is where things are really, really, really hot. So you want to be very careful because even just a moment's touching of any of that metal will give you very severe burns. So if you're using dish towels as oven mitts, make sure they're doubled up really well. Get different oven mitts for this. Try these bad boys. Way easier. This is phenomenal. Maybe get this if you don't have this. Okay, so another reason why we use the parchment paper is it allows us to have a sling to transport the dough into the Dutch oven. If we plopped it right in, again, we'd lose all that air we spent all this time building up. So, go like this, very, very carefully, without touching the sides of the Dutch oven, drop it in. Remember, this lid is still very hot, so keep grabbing it with a towel. Cover it up. Slide it back in. You probably knew that part, but you let that go for 15 minutes. Then you take the lid off and you do another 15 minutes, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, cool. So the bread's been in here for about 15 minutes covered. That captured the steam, allowed it to rise and expand. We're going to take the Dutch oven out, remove the lid, throw it back in for another 15 minutes. I'm going to try to do it without losing a bunch of stuff that's important. Okay, so if you come in close here, you can actually see how much the bread expanded, and you can see those extra little lines that we cut there. And you can also see how light the bread is right now. We're going to put it in another 15 minutes uncovered, and you can see how much darker it gets. Hey Google, set a 15-minute timer. Okay, so the bread's been in there for another 15 minutes uncovered. Now we're going to take it out. Your parchment paper at this point is probably really brittle, so it's hard to lift it up on parchment paper. So instead what we're going to do is use just a big spatula. Scoop it out. Throw it onto the cooling rack, and then we're actually going to put the lid back on because we've got another loaf. And we want the lid to heat back up. And we're going to put that in for another 15 or 20 minutes so that lid heats back up so the next one cooks just as well. Now, you might be tempted to try to cut into this loaf right away. Do not cut into it for at least an hour, because even though it's out of the oven, it's still baking right now. If you cut into it now, the inside's going to get really gooey. If you're trying to store this, you can leave it out in open air for up to a week. Sourdough actually keeps very well. If you cut into it, you might get a stale-ish side, but if you just cut that a little bit off, the rest is good. If you throw it in a toaster oven, you won't even notice. Okay, so you just saw the whole process from start to finish, other than creating your starter the night before, which I'll record for you in the next day or so. And it's pretty easy. It just takes a while. Start early in the day and late at night. I've got another loaf I'm going to bake, but it's the exact same as the one I just did. 15 minutes covered, 15 minutes uncovered at 475. You're going to have a perfect loaf. Be really careful. It's really hot. Let your bread cool before you cut into it. But again, even if you cut in a little bit early, this bread's going to be absolutely delicious. Super easy recipe. I hope that you try this out, and yeah, let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear what your results are.